Welcome everyone to part 3 of my presentation on Narayana Iyer. I ended last month's talk with a major digression on Bhagavan's attitude to physical renunciation. With that topic concluded, I can now go back to the text of the chapter I will be including in the next edition of part 1 of The Power of the Presence. This is how Narayana Iyer continues with his recollections of his time with Bhagavan, since he begins his account by saying, one day I was sitting near Bhagavan's couch. Here is a photo of him sitting next to the sofa in not the old hall, it's somewhere outside nearby. He's the man in the light-coloured shirt in the background. This is how he begins his account. One day I was sitting near Bhagavan's couch. I felt puzzled by the ancient teaching that everything that appears in the world is Maya or illusion. I wondered how it could be when I saw Bhagavan, the couch on which he sat, the barrier separating me from Bhagavan and myself. How could all these be false? I asked Bhagavan, explaining my doubt. Bhagavan, can all of us be unreal and non-existent? Please enlighten me. Bhagavan laughed and asked me whether I had had any dreams the previous night. I replied that I had seen several people lying asleep. He continued, he said, suppose I now ask you to go and wake all those people in the dream and tell them they are not real. How absurd it would be. That is how it is to me. There is nothing but the dreamer. So where does the question of dream people, real or unreal, arise? How can we speak of waking them up and telling them that they are not real? We are all unreal. Why do you doubt it? That, the self, alone is real. After this explanation, I never had any doubt about the unreality of the objective world. I constantly feel that the reality of its unreal nature. This immediately reminded me of a reply that Bhagavan gave that was recorded by Lakshman Sharma in Sri Ramana Maharshi. Bhagavan had apparently been asked about the Bodhisattva vow, the one where Buddhists vow not to attain liberation until all of the beings have attained it first. When this was explained to Bhagavan, he laughed and remarked, that's like someone saying, I'm not going to wake up from my dream until all the other characters in my dream have woken up first. Narayana Iyer continues, on another occasion, Bhagavan said, everything is unreal, like dream objects. However, at a certain stage, there exists truth, the reality, and world, the unreality. And Jnani's job is to awaken the ignorant to the fact that what they see and feel is unreal, and that the reality is their own being. This can be compared to an elephant dreaming of a lion and suddenly waking up and finding that the lion is unreal and that the being, reality itself, alone is real. The elephant is the jiva or individual, the dream is the unreal world, and the lion, the jnani or guru. The guru is the link between the unreal and the real. The elephant and lion analogy is one that Bhagavan spoke about on many occasions. It originally came from a 15th century Tamil Advaita text entitled Orivil Odukam, which can be translated as subsiding into the self through the elimination of obstacles or ceaseless abidance in the self. Bhagavan appreciated it so much, he asked Muruganar to bring out a Tamil commentary showing its true Advaitic nature, since the only explanatory text that most people could read was a Saiva one. Muruganar never got round to fulfilling Bhagavan's request, but he did compose a couple of introductory verses which indicate that it was a work he intended to take up at some future point. Fortunately, a few years ago, Robert Butler brought out a full English translation of the work, along with extensive explanatory notes. It was published by Sri Ramanasramam, and this is his translation of the elephant and lion verse. What course of study might the mature disciple adopt to achieve the loss of his personal self if the Sadguru does not cast his glance of grace upon him? He is like an elephant in must, who becomes quite still, without the slightest tremor, when in his dream the enduring great lion that is the Sadguru appears before him on his path. The photo shows a very young Robert around 1980 with Kupuswami, his first Tamil teacher. Ideas and imagery from Oraval Odikam crop up in quite a few of Bhagavan's replies to questioners, but he rarely mentioned that this was the text that was the source of them. Here, for example, is another one that Bhagavan used extensively. This particular instance appears in talks. This is what Bhagavan said there. He who instructs an ardent seeker to do this or that is not a true master. The seeker is already afflicted by his activities and wants peace and rest. In other words, he wants cessation of his activities. Instead of that, he is told to do something in addition to or in place of his other activities. Can that be a help to the seeker? Activity is creation. Activity is the destruction of one's inherent happiness. If activity be advocated, the advisor is not a master, but the killer. Either the creator, Brahma, or death, Yama, may be said to have come in the guise of such a master. He cannot liberate the aspirant, but strengthens his fetters. And this is how Balala expressed the same idea in his original verse. And this is the Ashram's edition of the text on the right. This is what the verse says. Having exhausted themselves by activities, aspirants come to the Guru seeking jnana. He alone is the true jnana-bestowing Guru who, possessing the wealth of bliss, produces the crop of bliss in them so that they wander without volition and without doing anything. But the Guru who occasions the least rising of their ego through his instructions is both Brahma, he who possesses the ability to create the world, and Yama too, the god of death. This is, for me, a fascinating and highly distinctive idea, and I'm not surprised that Bhagavan quoted it several times. Brahma, the god of creation, symbolizes birth, while Yama is death. What the verse is saying is that if a guru makes you do things, even spiritual practices, he's just creating new karma for you. And that karma will keep you in the cycle of birth and death. If an individual eye is needed to carry out the guru's instructions, he is keeping you in bondage, not freeing you from it. The implication of the first half of the verse is that the true guru absorbs you into the motionless silence of his own blissful self, freeing you from the necessity of remaining on the wheel of birth and death, and freeing you from the compulsion of doing spiritual practices with the I am the doer idea. Back to Narayana Iyer and his account of his time with Bhagavan. The next sentence is one of my all-time favorite quotes from Bhagavan, so I will give it a page to itself, and then I will give some of my own commentary on it. This is what Narayana Iyer recorded Bhagavan saying. On another occasion, Bhagavan, said, there is no jnani, realized being. Jnana, knowledge alone is. I think we all subconsciously buy into the idea that there is a division between those who have realized the self and those who have not. And we call these categories the jnanis and the ajnanis, the knowers of the self and those who are ignorant of it. With this perspective, we strive for jnana, assuming that if we get it, we will be jnanis, knowers of jnana, and that those who don't get it will be left behind as ajnanis. This is, according to Bhagavan, an utterly false dichotomy that depends for its validity on the permanent existence of an individual knowing I. Without the unreal I, this distinction cannot survive. From the standpoint of the self, there is no individual I, and there don't exist knowers of the self, jnanis, and those who are ignorant of the self, ajnanis. This is what Bhagavan had to say on this matter in Upadesha Manjari, Spiritual Instruction. Sadhu Natanananda, the recorder of this dialogue and the compiler of the work, appears on the right. Bhagavan makes it clear here that ideas about bondage and liberation can only be sustained as long as one buys into the idea that there is an individual self who experiences them. And this is what is written there. Bondage and liberation are mere linguistic terms. They have no reality of their own. Therefore, they cannot function of their own accord. It is necessary to accept the existence of some basic thing of which they are the modifications. If one inquires for whom is their bondage and liberation, it will be seen they are for me. If one inquires who am I, one will see that there is no such thing as the I. And Bhagavan's answer continues on the next slide, where he says, It will then be as clear as an amalaka fruit in one's hand that what remains is one's real being. As this truth will be naturally and clearly experienced by those who leave aside mere verbal discussions and inquire into themselves inwardly, at least for a moment, there is no doubt that all realized persons uniformly see neither bondage nor liberation so far as the true self is concerned. In Guru Vajkakovai verses 120 and 121, Bhagavan repeated the same truth, that there are not different jnanis who know the truth, living alongside jivas who don't. In that place, he said, verse 120, in the hearts of those who earnestly inquire, jnana alone permanently exists as the supreme reality. After the I am the body ego has vanished, are they in truth bodily forms, such that we might say of them, that one is a peerless jnani, this one is a peerless jnani. And the paired verse in this sequence says, 121, you who with a great eagerness and an expectation of seeing miracles wander around looking at this Mahatma and that Mahatma. If you inquire into the real nature of your own Mahatma, great self, reach the heart and realize it, the great self, then every Mahatma will be found to be only that oneself. And that, of course, is Muruggana, the compiler of the work on the right. Lakshman Sharma, I've mentioned him already today, seen here at the bottom with his wife Kanakammal, also recorded Bhagavan's teachings on this point in Sri Ramana Paravidya Upanishad. There in these 3 verses he wrote, the popular notion that there are many sages is also not true. All differences belong to the world. In the worldless state they do not exist. He who says, I have today seen this sage, I shall see others also, does not know the true nature of sages, which is reality consciousness bliss. This is what Bhagavan has told us on this point. For him who knows not the sage who is within himself, there appear to be many sages. For him who knows that one who is his own self, this plurality of sages is non-existent. I will now move on to the next paragraph of Narayana Iyer's account, where he wrote, about the jivanmukta, realized while still living. Bhagavan said, the jivanmukta is one without any thoughts or sankalpas, that's thoughts, intentions to accomplish things. The thought process ceases completely in him. Some power makes him do things. So he is not the doer, but the one who is made to do. That's Narayana Iyer standing behind Bhagavan with his arms folded. Bhagavan commented on this absence of thought and intention in Jiva Muktas in this interesting passage from Talks. This is what is written there. The gods and the sages experience the infinite continuously and eternally without their vision being obscured at any moment. Their minds are surmised by the spectators to function, but in fact they do not. Such surmise is due to the sense of individuality in those who draw inferences. There is no mental function in the absence of individuality. Individuality and mind functions are coexistent. The one cannot remain without the other. And that on the right is Munagala Venkataramaya, the compiler of Talks, standing outside his hut in Palakottu in the late 1930s. If there are no sankalpas, no will or intention to perform actions or pursue goals, no chooser of future actions, how does the jnani decide what to do next in his day-to-day activities? The best example I know that illustrates this is Bhagavan's move from Skandashram to the current site of Ramanasramam. After Bhagavan's mother, Kanakammal, was buried on the current site of Ramanasramam in May 1922, Bhagavan continued to live at Skandashram with most of his devotees. A few of them, though, started to live in the mother's samadhi, a small thatched hut in those days, to take care of it. Chinnaswami, Bhagavan's brother, was one of them. The photo on the right is of Bhagavan standing near the thatched hut that was erected over his mother's samadhi. It was taken in the second half of 1922. And at the top, there is a photo of Bhagavan and his mother taken on the hill, probably in the Skandashram era. After his mother passed away, Bhagavan used to walk down the hill once in a while to spend time with the devotees who were living in and next to her samadhi. On one of these occasions, he didn't go back to Skandashram in the evening. Instead, when evening came, he slept at the samadhi. Nor did he go back the next day, and after a few days of residence there, the devotees realized that he had permanently moved down the hill without making any formal announcement. This is Kunji Swami sitting on the right of the group photo. On the right, it was taken at Skandashram. Bhagavan's mother, Aragama, was sitting between Kunji Swami and Bhagavan. And in the other group photo, Kunji Swami is standing on the top left. I'm featuring Kunji Swami because he wrote in his book, Anadu Ninai Vugul, that Bhagavan made the move from Skandashram to Ramanasramam as an act of compassion towards his elderly devotees who couldn't climb up the hill to Skandashram. This would imply some motive, some sankalpa on Bhagavan's part. Bhagavan himself never endorsed this explanation. In one of his accounts of his move to the base of the hill, Bhagavan remarked, "At the end of the day, the body didn't stand up and the legs didn't start walking back to Skandashram, so that night I slept there. And the same thing happened the next day and the day after that." Some power was making Bhagavan do the things he did and not do the things he didn't do. It didn't make his body stand up and return to Skandashram in the evening, so he remained near his mother's samadhi until it was clear to everyone there that he had made the permanent move to the current site of Ramanasramam. No one made that decision, no motives were involved, there was no cause for it. The self simply refused to make Bhagavan's body get up and walk back to Skandashram. This is another interesting old photo of Ramanasramam taken when it was just a thatched hut in 1922. Bhagavan doesn't appear in this one, but it was taken on the same day as the thatched hut photo I showed 2 slides ago. It is looking towards the Pradakshina road, and you can just make out the Pali Mantapam on the other side of the road. I will now return to Narayana Iyer's account, in which he continued with the following remarks. Bhagavan Sri Ramana taught that Vedas and Upanishads are not mere book lore or dry script. He said that moksha or liberation is not something to be attained in a distant future or after death, but that it is our ever-present nature to be known and experienced here and now, and that we are ever realized, and that the simple and direct method is introspection and self-inquiry. The photo shows Bhagavan sitting in the old hall with the Patasala boys and their Sanskrit teacher. They would chant portions of the Vedas every day in Bhagavan's presence. Ramanasramam has been running a traditional Vedic Patasala since the 1930s. Narayana Iyer continued with his account. I once asked him, Bhagavan, it is said that all roads lead to Rome, all religions lead to the same goal. How can it be said that the quest, who am I, is the only way and the direct way? He replied, yes, all roads lead to Rome, but on reaching Rome, you have to go to the citadel, the sanctum, which is what I say is just that. In the photograph, Narayana Iyer is sitting next to Bhagavan on the right side. The picture was taken on a visit to Skandashram in the mid-1940s. Bhagavan accepted the usefulness of all spiritual paths. He never discouraged devotees from following whatever methods appealed to them, but at the same time, he was quite insistent that only self-inquiry or complete self-surrender could effectively extinguish the I thought in the heart. That's the point of the citadel analogy Bhagavan is using here. The I thought needs to be poured into the heart and die there for realization to happen. The other methods can make the mind quiet and peaceful, but the final step occurs when the one who performs the practices sinks into the heart and is irrevocably extinguished there. Self-inquiry and unconditional surrender can accomplish this, but according to Bhagavan, other methods can only take one to a point where one of these two methods takes over and completes the job. The next passage from Narayana Iyer gives an interesting insight into Bhagavan's attitude towards the recording of his spoken teachings. He wrote, "I used to translate from Tamil to English Sri Bhagavan's replies to letters received by him. On one occasion, when Bhagavan was talking very fast, I asked him to wait a little and took up a paper and pencil to write down what he was saying. He responded by saying, well, just write what you are able to. If I begin to dictate, they would want to print it. There will be no end to it. Like an ass carrying a load of camphor, I had no idea of all that I wrote or listened to." Bhagavan would be shown incoming letters, and he would then give general hints on what should appear in the reply. He almost never dictated responses. It was up to the devotee drafting the reply to remember Bhagavan's verbal points and then write them down accurately. Bhagavan would check the written responses every afternoon before they were posted to make sure that his words and instructions had been properly presented. The outgoing letters were not therefore in Bhagavan's own words, they were just summaries of what he had said to whoever was on letter writing duty that day. In the 1940s, a devotee called Ramanasramam would do most of the drafting of the outgoing letters. I remember reading about one instance of a letter going backwards and forwards several times because Bhagavan was not happy with the way that Ramanasramam had articulated his views. So he did check up on these things. The photo of the Kumbhabhishekam of the Mother's Temple, the photo is the Kumbhabhishekam of the Mother's Temple that took place in 1949. Ramanasramam, the drafter of the Ashram letters, is the man on the right standing behind Bhagavan. I only know of one instance of Bhagavan sending out a detailed letter that was more or less dictated, and that was when Ganapati Muni sent him in Sanskrit a list of technical queries about Bhagavan's teachings. This was in the early 1930s when Ganapati Muni had left Tiruvannamalai for good. Bhagavan sent a long reply via T.K. Sundaresha Iyer. T.K. Sundaresha Iyer is standing next to Bhagavan in the right side photo. The other picture is of Ganapati Muni taken when he was quite young. The initial letter, Bhagavan's response to it, and Ganapati Muni's follow-up reply were all published in an article that appeared in the Mountain Path in the early 1980s. The whole correspondence also appears on my site since Michael James and I were both involved in its editing, translation, and commentary. Ganapati Muni's letters to Bhagavan from this period, all written in Sanskrit, ended up being published in a book entitled Epistles of Light, which has been published by Ramanasramam. The specific exchange of letters with Bhagavan is interesting to me primarily because it highlights some of the major philosophical differences that existed between Bhagavan and Ganapati Muni, who could never quite bring himself to accept Bhagavan's Advaitic teachings. As I said earlier, this is the only instance I know of Bhagavan more or less dictating a reply. Narayana Iyer continues with his story. By this time, I had made friends with the attendants, Sri Madhavaswami, Sri Satyananda Swami, Sri Krishna Swami, Sri Rangaswami, and others. None of them protested when I gradually introduced personal services to Sri Bhagavan, such as massaging his legs, applying fomentations, etc. There were occasions when his muscles became rigid or painful. Here are the four attendants mentioned by Narayana Iyer. Top left is Krishna Swami walking with Bhagavan in Palakottu. Top right is Madhava Swami accompanying Bhagavan on one of his hill walks. Bottom left is Rangaswami. He's the short man standing immediately behind Bhagavan. And on the right is Satyananda Swami, one of Bhagavan's final attendants. Bhagavan was very sensitive to being touched. It was a rare privilege to be allowed to massage him in this way. It had been discovered over time that Bhagavan occasionally had adverse reactions when visitors touched him. In extreme cases, welts and rashes had been observed at the touching point. Because of this, it was one of his attendants' primary jobs to prevent devotees and visitors from touching him. That was to protect him and keep him healthy. The railing that eventually appeared around his sofa in the old hall was initially put there as a barrier to stop visitors and devotees from touching his feet. Narayana Iyer now gives his own theory on why Bhagavan needed so many massages. His physical work, such as cutting vegetables and directing the work of the kitchen, was generally confined to the early hours of the morning, when only the residents were present. After 5 a.m. during the Veda Parayana, or when visitors came from the outside, he would be on his couch in the hall, sitting there or just reclining like a statue cut in alabaster, or like one posing for a painter or sculptor. Sitting motionless like this all day made his muscles hard and inflexible. Some massaging was necessary to loosen them. I was allowed to perform this task, and thus, by slow degrees, a sort of familiarity and intimacy grew up between myself and Bhagavan. Narayana Iyer had started off his service with a desire to help Bhagavan, but over time he began to realize that Bhagavan was subtly arranging and supervising most of his time in his daily activities. However, it didn't seem to bother him. This is what he wrote about this phase of his life. During one of my visits, I stayed outside the hall for about half an hour. When I entered the hall, Sri Bhagavan remarked, "What is this? You're not at all to be seen." Although it was I who chose to render personal service, he seemed to have assumed the role of a master with complete control over my program. It was he who decided what I should do and how I should spend my time. Anything beyond the usual routine, such as a stroll into the town, was done only after seeking his permission. Although I had not bargained for this surrender of freedom, I yielded to him as there was such unmistakable love from him. That's Narayana Iyer sitting on the right-hand end of the photo. The man sitting next to him is Munagala Venkatramaya, the compiler of talks. Narayana Iyer now begins a new story. In the photo, he appears on the top right corner. I showed this in my first talk. This is the earliest photo we have of him with Bhagavan. It was taken at the end of 1928. He wrote in his account, "One morning about 5 a.m. I prostrated before Bhagavan and took leave of him. There had been some functions such as Jayanti or Mahapuja the previous day, and all were tired and asleep. Mahapuja was the big annual celebration that commemorated the passing of Bhagavan's mother, Argammal. Jayanti was Bhagavan's birthday celebration. Thousands of people would be fed on these special occasions, and the extra workload would leave all the kitchen staff exhausted. There was a long-standing tradition that everyone who turned up on these days would be served a free meal at lunchtime, and they were done in multiple sittings." Narayana Iyer's opening remarks reminded me of a very similar occasion when Annamalai Swami had to help Bhagavan cook breakfast for the ashram residents because the cooking staff were still asleep after a mammoth festival effort the day before. This is how Annamalai Swami described what happened. "Since I, Annamalai Swami, was a non-Brahmin, I was not allowed to do any of the cooking. On the few occasions that I helped in the kitchen, I was restricted to cutting up vegetables. There was one occasion, though, when Bhagavan broke the rules and let me do some cooking. It was the morning after Jayanti celebration. All the cooks were asleep, completely exhausted, after feeding thousands of people the day before." And that's Annamalai Swami standing outside the door of the Ramanasramam kitchen in the mid to late 1930s. Annamalai Swami continues, "Bhagavan took me, Madhava Swami, and Ramakrishna Swami into the kitchen to make upma because it was clear that the cooks were not going to wake up in time to prepare the breakfast. Under Bhagavan's supervision, we cut vegetables, shredded coconuts, and made a large pot of rava upma." That's Annamalai Swami standing on the right next to Bhagavan. Madhava Swami is standing slightly behind Bhagavan. The photo was taken outside Bhagavan's bathroom, which is close to the entrance of the dining room. Annamalai Swami continues, "When it was ready, Bhagavan gave me a sample to taste. At first, I declined the offer because I hadn't had time to clean my teeth that morning. Bhagavan had taken me straight from my room to the kitchen. Bhagavan didn't care what state my mouth was in. Just take it, he said. We can clean our teeth afterwards. A little later, he added, don't tell any of the others that we did this cooking. The Brahmins will not eat it if they find out that you cook their food. That's Ramanasramam standing behind Bhagavan, excerpted from an early 1930s group photo. And in this photo, Ramanasramam is standing on the left with his arms folded, and he concluded his story in the following way. This was a good example of Bhagavan's attitude to Brahmin orthodoxy. He went to a lot of trouble to avoid offending the sentiments of orthodox Brahmins, mainly by permitting only Brahmins to cook the ashram's food, but he was not so strict that he was not willing to bend the rules once in a while if it wasn't a good cause. His attitude was governed by a desire to avoid complaints and dissension rather than a desire to stick to the letter of caste dharma. On the big festival days, such as Jayanti, the ashram would get extremely crowded with thousands of people coming to eat and hopefully get Bhagavan's darshan as well. Bhagavan would, more often than not, be seated on his sofa just inside the door of the old hall. People were not allowed on these special days because it got too congested and chaotic inside. They would simply file past and pay their respects. Bhagavan generally sat in silence for most of the day. Ramanasramam and several other devotees have commented in their writings that despite the noise and the crowds milling around, the feeling of peace and inner silence would often be much stronger on these special days when Bhagavan sat on his sofa in silence at the entrance to the old hall. I'm now going back to Narayana Iyer's kitchen story. This is how he began it. It's a repeat of a few slides ago. One morning at about 5 a.m., I prostrated before Bhagavan and took leave of him. There had been some function such as Jayanti or Mahapuja the previous day, and all were tired and asleep. Sri Bhagavan commanded, "Wait," and went into the kitchen. I followed. He searched and found nothing to give me. He then put his hand inside a pot and found some almonds. He immediately lit a fire, put a pan on it, fried the almonds in ghee, and gave them to me. Though I protested, he gave me a big packet of them and asked me to eat them on my way and to give some to the children at home. Is this not divine love? The photo shows Bhagavan sitting on his seat in the old dining room. The woman fanning him is Mudalia Patti. I think it is clear that Bhagavan and Narayana Iyer had a deep bond with strong love flowing in both directions, possibly a very strong past life connection. That's my theory. I think you would have to have a very strong level of love and devotion to elicit behavior such as this from Bhagavan. This was not the only occasion that Bhagavan went out of his way to provide Narayana Iyer and his family with food. He continued in the following way. Sometimes when I came and prostrated before him, an attendant would run up and fetch me a packet of some dish of groundnuts or something special that had been served during the midday meal. I would be told by the attendant that Bhagavan wanted a little of it to be kept for Narayana Iyer, who would be coming in the evening. Oh, what have I done to deserve such kindness and attention? Tears trickle down my cheeks as I write this at such a distance of time. And that's Narayana Iyer again in the background, sitting behind Bhagavan's sofa. Well, Bhagavan went out of his way to ensure that Narayana Iyer and his family were well supplied with snacks. Narayana Iyer himself always made a point of offering food to Bhagavan and his devotees when he arrived at the ashram after working all week in some distant town. This is how Kanakammal described some of these visits. Narayana Iyer's job entailed frequent transfers. He was successively posted at Arani, Polor, and Shankagiri, Salem, for varying periods. However, there was no let-up in his regular visits. Never a Sunday passed without Narayana Iyer arriving at the ashram. He always had some delectable snacks with him, which were prepared by his wife Lalita Iyer, who believed that she was cooking delicacies for God. These were savoured by everyone, as Bhagavan would never accept anything unless there was enough for all. That's Kanakammal on the right. She continues with her story. Very often I would bring omapodi, which Bhagavan appeared to have been quite fond of, and other items in quantities that would suffice for all in the hall. Once when Shantamal inquired of Bhagavan whether she could prepare some snacks in the ashram, Bhagavan replied, "Tomorrow is Sunday. Narayana Iyer will be arriving and will surely be bringing something to eat." Such was the certainty of his arrival and of the snacks that came with him. Chanting was the head cook in the Ashram dining room. That's in the center of the women's group on the right. Omapodi is a snack made of gram flour, rice flour and spices. It's a favorite at Diwali festivals in many parts of India. And then Kanakammal made an interesting observation about food distribution in the hall. This was something that Muruganar had initially noted. She wrote, "In the afternoon, devotees bringing snacks would offer them in their containers to Bhagavan. After a quick look around the hall, Bhagavan would pick up a little and hand over the rest to the attendant nearby to be distributed in equal measure among those present." Muruganar, a keen observer of Bhagavan's ways, used to recall with wonder that if the attendant gave each one present exactly the same amount that Bhagavan had taken, it would just suffice for all, whether the number present was great or small. This was found to be unfailingly true. Whatever the quantity Bhagavan allotted for himself was found to be the right measure for distribution that day. I like this story. This is the only place that I can recollect it has been recorded. That's Muruganar sitting cross-legged in front of Bhagavan. The man standing to Bhagavan's right, leaning on the wall, is Ramanasramam. I mentioned him earlier as being the person who generally wrote all the responses to letters that were addressed to Bhagavan. Various members of Kanakammal's family had been devotees of Bhagavan since the days when Bhagavan lived in Virupaksha cave. For a long period, she lived with Narayana Iyer's family in a hut that was located in his Saraswati Nilayam garden. This gave her ample opportunity to become familiar with his somewhat idiosyncratic ways. More on that later. She wrote about her association with Narayana Iyer in a long article that appeared in the Mountain Path in 2008. I will be reading out most of that article since I'm including it in my new Power of the Present chapter on Narayana Iyer. After Bhagavan passed away in 1950, Kanakammal joined a group of mostly women devotees who formed a study group headed by Muruganar. Throughout the 1950s, Muruganar gave them all lessons on the meaning of Bhagavan's written works. Ramanasramam has published Kanakammal's commentaries on Bhagavan's works, insights that she derived from her extensive lessons with Muruganar in the 1950s. That's Muruganar sitting with Bhagavan on the top left, on the top right, Kanakammal is on the top left. I'm now going to read out a story by Kanakammal that tells the story of Narayana Iyer's attempt to feed Bhagavan when the hall was unofficially closed. She wrote, "When Narayana Iyer arrived, he brought with him some savouries as usual and tried to enter the hall. However, the attendant prevented him and asked him to come back after 2 p.m. as Bhagavan was resting. Following these instructions, Narayana Iyer left and returned about 3 p.m. Bhagavan watched all this through the window. He wondered why Narayana Iyer had left without entering the hall. At 3 p.m. when Narayana Iyer finally came in, Bhagavan asked him, 'Why did you go away earlier?' Narayana Iyer replied, 'Bhagavan, today the train was rather late. I came to have your darshan, but they told me to come after 2 p.m. as you were resting, so I went away.' Bhagavan was not aware of the ashram management's new order. He just said, 'Is that so?' and talked about other matters. The next day after lunch, instead of entering the hall, as he would normally have done, Bhagavan sat outside it. The sun was blazing hot. Devotees wondered why Bhagavan did not enter the hall. The attendant requested him to go in, saying, 'Bhagavan, it is too hot outside now. We can come out here after 2 p.m. when it is cooler.' Bhagavan retorted, 'You have passed an order preventing people from seeing me before 2 p.m. But is there any rule that I should not come out before 2 p.m.? They can't come in to see me, but I can come out, can't I? Moreover, an order meant for everyone is meant for me too.' Thereafter, devotees themselves, by common consent, did not enter the hall before 2 p.m. The story of Bhagavan coming outside when Chinnaswami attempted to prevent people from coming to see him for a couple of hours in the middle of the day is well known. What is less well known is that it was partly prompted by an attendant telling Narayana Iyer that he could not go into the hall to have Bhagavan's darshan. Narayana Iyer had not seen him since the previous weekend, and Bhagavan could probably sense his frustrated longing and devotion and responded to it with this unexpected action. This is an interesting photo of the old hall taken in the late 30s or early 1940s. In those days, the entrance was on the opposite side to where the entrance is today. You can see Arunachala peeping out behind the roof of the hall, which means that this photo was taken from a location that today would be in the back portion of the Samadhi hall. You can also see the corner of the new dining room above the old hall, which means that the photo was taken after 1938, the year of its completion. If you walk around Bhagavan Samadhi, you can see the old doorway that still has its original door. Nowadays, it's never used. The midday ban on visitors entering the hall was not absolute. I know stories of a few devotees who were allowed in if their business was deemed important. Papaji, for example, told me that he managed it twice in 1944. Bhagavan could sense if devotees had an urgent need to see him, and he would respond by telling his attendants to let them in rather than keep them away. For a long time, the doors to the hall were never closed at all, even at night. In the 1930s, if you felt an urge to be with Bhagavan in the middle of the night, you could walk in at 2 or 3 a.m. and nobody would object. And if you had something important to pass on or discuss, Bhagavan would generally sense your presence, open his eyes, and interact with you. Kanakammal now continues with her account of Narayana Iyer. She wrote, owing to the profound grace of Bhagavan in due course, Narayana Iyer was posted to Tiruvannamalai itself. He was the first in a long line of devotees to have had the rare privilege of establishing a residence near the ashram in order to be in the holy presence of Bhagavan on a regular basis. Now, this is the house that Narayana Iyer built for himself and his family. It's located about 400 meters from Ramanasramam. I want to follow up on, on the statement made in the last slide that Narayana Iyer was the first devotee to build a house near Ramanasramam in the area now known as Ramana Nagar. This is how the area looked in the early 1930s. The photo was taken from the lower slopes of Arunachala. In the foreground, you can see some recognizable whitewashed ashram buildings that are still there today. The cowshed is on the left, the storeroom is in the center, and the old hall is on the right. About 150 meters further away from the hill, you can see a line of trees, which marks the road that is now the highway to Bangalore. On the other side of that road is, on this photo at least, a vast, empty, uninhabited expanse now known as Ramana Nagar. I have marked approximately the 1 acre plot that Narayana Iyer purchased and built his house on. I've marked it with a red rectangle. I guessed a little bit because the road adjacent to his plot didn't seem to exist in those days. Nowadays, the whole area on the other side of the road from Ramanasramam has been subsumed into the suburbs of Tiruvannamalai. The days when, on a government salary, you could buy an empty 1 acre field for your house and garden within walking distance of Ramanasramam are long since gone. While I was preparing for this talk, I asked ChatGPT what an acre of land would cost nowadays in the vicinity of the red rectangle. After thinking for a while and comparing recent sale prices, it came up with a figure of 2.8 to 3.6 million US, which is why nowadays the new developments on that street are mostly multi-story apartments. Now I'm going back to Kanakammal's account. Other than chanting Aladu Napadu, his entire sadhana comprised of simply remaining with Bhagavan whenever possible in the hall or in the kitchen, cutting vegetables, grinding chutney, and preparing breakfast in the wee hours of the morning. On any given morning, the trio of G.V. Subramaya, Kalyana Sundaram, Iyer of the bookstore, and Narayana Iyer will be found with Bhagavan. And here are a couple of photos I haven't shown before. On the top right, there is a group photo that features Kalyan Sundaram Iyer on the right-hand end of the front row. He looked after the ashram's bookstore and was mentioned in that story I just read out. On the bottom of this row, Paul Brunton can be seen holding a rope that is attached to one of Lakshmi's calves. And the photo at the bottom is of the old Ramanasramam book depot. The new book depot was constructed by Namale Swami in the early 1930s. She continues. One year, due to an unusual spell of drought, the ashram faced severe water scarcity on the eve of Jayanti. The devotees, organizing themselves into a long chain, passed vessels filled with water from hand to hand from the Agastya Tirtham in Palakottu to the kitchen. Narayana Iyer very enthusiastically participated in this collective endeavor. This is a very nice old picture. It's of Palakottu Tirtham. The man standing on the rock is an unidentified friend of Dr. Mice, a Dutch devotee who took the picture. On the top right, you can see a small Ganesh temple. This was lived in at various times by Muruganar, Viswanatha Swami, and Ganapati Muni. Viswanatha Swami, in his reminiscences, has written a nice account of Bhagavan visiting him there. I actually lived there as well for about 3 months in 1981. Namale Swami has also told a story of devotees forming a chain and moving water from this tank to Ramanasramam in the 1930s. That was a different water shortage. Droughts were common in this era, and Palakottu was the nearest available source of good water since it was designated as drinking water and respected as such. Palitirtham was closer, but that was used for bathing and clothes washing. Here's another lovely old photo, also taken by Dr. Meese. It's of Palitirtham. You can see women bathing and washing clothes on the steps on the far side of the Tirtham. This is the Tirtham that is located behind the back of Bhagavan's Samadhi Hall. As I mentioned earlier, because it was used for bathing, the water there was not suitable for kitchen use at Ramanasramam. Kanakammal continues. Narayana Iyer's Tiruvannamalai residence was built on a 1-acre site where he grew a variety of fruit trees and fodder for his cow. Whatever wild creatures found in that area were left to themselves. Occasionally he had snakes caught and released in isolated spots on the mountain. And here is Narayana Iyer sitting in his luxuriant garden. Standing behind him are Lalita, his wife, and one of his sons. Narayana Iyer might have picked up this habit of catching and releasing snakes from Bhagavan, who adopted the same policy at Ramanasramam. Bhagavan told his devotees that the wild animals were the original occupants of the ashram's land and should not be harmed in any way. Snakes and scorpions who were found in the ashram were captured and released on the hill. One of the tricks that his attendants had to learn was safely picking up scorpions from the rear and releasing them on the hill. Scorpions raise their curved tail when threatened, but can only strike in a forward direction like this. If you approach the curved tail from behind, you can safely pick them up by gripping the tail from behind with the thumb and forefinger. They can't strike if you're behind them. I've never tried it, but it seems like a reasonable conjecture. Kanakammal's next story is one that I mentioned in a previous installment of this series on Narayana Iyer. This is what she wrote. Prior to constructing the house, Iyer took the plans to Bhagavan to have them blessed. After careful perusal, Bhagavan observed, the plan is all right, but where is the well? Though Iyer had a location in mind, it was not marked on the blueprint. This turned out to be a benediction since Bhagavan selected the site and marked the exact location. Later, one can see what a blessing it was. Not only was the water as sweet as tender coconut water, but the well never ran dry. It was thus a source of succor for the entire neighborhood in times of severe drought. I don't have a picture of the well, but it's just to the right of this photo, less than 10 meters from the main house. She continues. A little distance from the front door was a hexagonal thatched porch with a knee-high parapet wall. Inside was a water pot, 2 wooden bookshelves with books, and a few chairs for visitors. Though a large estate, in keeping with Iyer's Spartan lifestyle, this sparsely and humbly furnished thatched hut was where Narayana Iyer spent most of his time when he was not with Bhagavan. It was the centre of the household social activities. And this is the hexagonal thatched porch on the right, being used here as a wedding hall for the marriage of one of Narayana Iyer's daughters. Kanakammal continues. Despite the large family he had to provide for, no domestic worry ever deflected him from his devotion to Bhagavan. His single-pointed dharma was serving Bhagavan's devotees with profuse hospitality. His pastime was satsang with fellow devotees. When he sat with them, the invariable topic was Bhagavan. And here is Narayana Iyer's large family in a group shot taken on the steps at the back of Ramanasramam. Narayana Iyer is on the right, Lalita is on the left in front of the pillar, and the children are in the middle of the front. Madhavaswami is the attendant at the rear, holding Bhagavan's water pot. Kanakammal now lists some of the devotees Narayana Iyer spent his time with. Narayana Iyer's closest friends included Major Chadwick, Gurum Subramaya, Amritananda Yati, Morris Friedman, Mauni Sadhu, and Viswanatha Swami. They and other devotees frequently gathered in his house to engage in fervent and engrossing conversations about Bhagavan and his teachings. That's Chadwick with Bhagavan on the top right. Morris Friedman wearing a suit is in the bottom photo. G.V. Subramaya is shown by himself. Subramaya is one of those devotees who appears frequently in stories about the ashram in the 30s and 40s, but somehow never managed to get himself into a photo with Bhagavan. I have never seen the two of them together, not even in a large group photo. Kanakammal continues. Chadwick especially relished Lalita Iyer's cooking, and Amritananda Yati always chose to dine in their house whenever he was in Tiruvannamalai. One of Bhagavan's attendants, Venkataratnam, who resided in a small cottage in Iyer's compound, was often there as well. Thus, all of his friends were able to partake of feasts, both spiritual and temporal. Whenever Narayana Iyer had time, he went for pradakshina around the hill, accompanied by G.V. Subramaya. Much of his spare time was spent reading books on Bhagavan. The photo shows Chadwick standing behind Bhagavan. Next to him on his right is Venkataratnam, the attendant who lived in Narayana Iyer's compound. The shorter devotee next to Venkataratnam is Swami Sachinanda, another of Bhagavan's attendants. I mentioned him earlier when Narayana Iyer was telling the story of how Bhagavan's regular attendants allowed him to join a group of people who were allowed to massage Bhagavan's stiff legs. If you're hearing odd noises, we've just started having a rain that might get heavier and more noisy in the next few minutes. So if you hear some cat on a hot tin roof kind of noises, it's just a heavy storm going on outside. Narayana Iyer once wrote a letter to G.V. Subramaya in which he tried to explain the effect that Bhagavan had on him. G.V. Subramaya liked it so much and he later decided to publish it in his book. The two of them appear at the bottom of this slide, and this is what the letter said. I consider my life itself as a long prostration to Bhagavan, our Father. When I think of it, since the day I came into his presence, is there any conscious moment when he is away from my thoughts? Today I feel as light as a lark. I have no worries, no load on my heart. What has happened, you might ask? Nothing but an hour in Bhagavan's presence this morning. I don't meditate ever. I don't know how to do it, or if I try, just the opposite happens. A vast train of ideas, pictures from all corners of the globe come up. So I simply sit. Yet something happens. Something inside me gets contacted with something invisible from Bhagavan, and I don't even know it. But I am sure it is the case. Kanakammal continues by describing Lalita, Narayana Iyer's wife. His wife was a truly sattvic woman, given to dharmic ways and scrupulously adhering to the sastraic injunctions pertaining to a housewife. She shared her husband's ways and views completely. Though born into a rich family, she had no pretensions or airs about her. Simple, carefree, and unattached, she ran the household with a contented mind and, to the satisfaction of the entire family, making optimum use of the resources available to her. That's Lalita in later years standing behind Narayana Iyer. And then Kanakammal adds a little note about their compliant children. She wrote, "The children, like the mother, were an uncomplaining lot and were content in doing what they were told to do by their father." The photo shows Narayana Iyer on the left of a group photo with Bhagavan taken in the 1930s. The children are sitting in a row in front of him. Kanakammal now goes on to describe the other important member of the household. Narayana Iyer derived inordinate pleasure in serving his cow. Tending his garden was also dear to him. The occasions when his cow was about to give birth were significant enough to merit a day's leave from his work. This exclusive privilege, Mrs. Iyer humorously used to remark, was the cow's alone and not extended to his wife for her own deliveries. On the right is a photo of Narayana Iyer's beloved cow standing in front of their Saraswati Narayan house. Kanakammal continued, Iyer's one passion was to chant Aladu Narpadu unceasingly. Neither conventional Vedic duties nor extravagant ritualistic observances had any attraction for him. The constant chanting of Aladu Narpadu was all the religious observance known to him. His extreme passion for this work and his unwillingness to be distracted from it will be elaborated on later in Kanakammal's account. Meanwhile, here is another photo of Kanakammal that I haven't shown before. I have not come across any photos of Kanakammal with Bhagavan or any of her when she was young and visiting Ramanasramam regularly. Back now to the story of the cow, as narrated by Kanakammal. The person who milked his cow used to turn up at 5 a.m., announcing his arrival by ringing his bicycle bell. Iyer, who would invariably be chanting Aladu Narpadu loudly, would open the gate for him. The day would unfailingly begin with Aladu Narpadu, a routine so predictable and punctual, the neighbour opposite him, an Andhra lady, remarked that she could safely set her clock by his recitation in the morning. His chanting continued throughout the day while he watered the plants or gave his cow a bath. He continues, if ever he were to hear a voice raised in argument among the children, he would simply raise his voice and chant even louder. It was a wonder to see the children immediately quietened, as if the mesmerizing spell of this powerful mantra made them aware of Bhagavan's very presence. This story about Narayana Iyer's children gives me an excuse to show this wonderful photo of Bhagavan walking in Palakottu. I just love the way the sunlight plays on the trees and the characters in it. For many years, the Ramanasramam photo archives had the child labelled as Mani, Bhagavan's grandnephew. However, when Mani announced very late in his life that it wasn't him, a little research was done and the boy turned out to be one of Narayana Iyer's sons. And this in turn gives me an opportunity to tell a lovely, unrelated story about a young girl who also found herself walking with Bhagavan. A few years ago, my phone rang while I was working at home in Tiruvannamalai, and a very cultured and educated Indian voice on the other end asked me if I was David Godman. I had no idea who it was, but I said yes. She then told me that she had met a mutual friend of ours in the US at an academic event, and he had encouraged her to get in touch with me, and I soon found out why. She said, I met Bhagavan when I was very young in the 1940s. I had no idea who he was or why so many people were going to see him. My parents just told me he was God. As an incentive to accompany them to the ashram, they told me he could fulfill my desires and wishes. To a young girl, this sounded like he was some sort of Santa Claus figure you could go to with a shopping list of things that you wanted, which is what I did. I went into his presence and gave him a long list of all the things I decided I wanted to have. Bhagavan laughed when he heard the list and said, I can't give you anything from that list, so let's go for a walk instead. He got off his sofa, took me by the hand, and we went for a 30-minute private walk on the lower slopes of Arunachala. And that was her introduction to Bhagavan on her first day at the ashram, a private walk with him on the mountain, holding her hand. That walk was still vivid and memorable in her mind when she called to tell me about it 80 years later. What a great memory to have of one's first visit to Bhagavan and Ramanasramam. Kanakammal now continues her account of life in the Narayana Iyer household. When Mrs. Iyer used to list the requirements of the household, acknowledgement of it would be the continuation of the chanting of Ulladu Narpadu in a slightly different tone. If one of his shoes was missing, the other would be prominently suspended above the entrance, making entry or exit impossible. Even then, chanting would go on uninterruptedly, but in a raised voice. Mrs. Iyer, taking the hint, would get the children to search, and in no time the missing shoe would be found. Narayana Iyer had evolved a way of communicating by his chanting. That's Narayana Iyer, second from the right, with his wife Lalita standing in front of him. Kanakammal continues. In those days, the area around the ashram was uninhabited. There were just one or two houses in Ramana Nagar. During the holy month of Margali, December, January, in the still hours of the early morning, Iyer would walk through the ashram from his house, chanting Ulladu Narpadu all the way. His chanting filled the air with its reverberations, saturating the atmosphere with its Advaitic content. And this is the route that Narayana Iyer took on his walk from his house to Ramanasramam. It's a long time ago, this photo. Even those of you who are familiar with the area might find it hard to recognize where this might be. For reference points, the shrine at the bottom right corner is the Dakshinamurti temple that is located close to the entrance of Ramanasramam, about 200 meters towards town. There is a group of 3 people on the dirt road. The photographer is standing on. To their right is the land that would eventually house the Morley compound, one of Ramanasramam's main areas for guest accommodation. You getting a white line? Apologies, I appear to have hit something that made a white line appear on the screen. No idea what I did, no idea how to undo it. We'll leave it there for the moment. Kanakammal continues. I stayed in Iyer's compound for nearly 10 years, occupying a small cottage there. He looked upon me as his own daughter. He always made himself aware of my requirements when he procured groceries for his own household and would always meet my needs. And here's another photo of Kanakammal from her later years. As I mentioned earlier, there don't seem to be any from the era she was with Bhagavan or from when she lived with Narayana Iyer. She continued, Iyer had a humorous side to his personality. He delighted in harmless, mischievous pranks. The vegetables and provisions he got for me would be left on different windowsills in bits and pieces, leading me on a treasure hunt. Chadwick, a great votary of the Sri Chakra Puja, one day gave the prasad, a half coconut, to Iyer. But Chadwick felt to give away prasad without partaking of even a little of it was sacrilegious, so he bit off the protruding part and handed the rest over. Aghast, Iyer refused it, saying that once bitten into, it became impure. Instantly, Chadwick removed the adjoining portion with his fingernail and repeated the offer, but Iyer still declined. To him, once something is bitten into, it is forever impure. The photo is again of Chadwick sitting with Bhagavan on the hill. Kanakammal continues, one day I received an urgent summons from him through his son Arunachalam. When I arrived, I beheld a rare and wonderful spectacle. Iyer's cow was calving. The head of the calf had emerged and was fully visible, but the rest of its body was still concealed. The cow now was two-faced, one head in front and another in the rear. Extolled by the Sastras as a Dvaimukhi, the two-faced cow, this is considered highly auspicious. The entire household had gathered for this rare sight and prostrated before the cow and calf, and so did I. And this, of course, is the celebrity cow standing outside Narayana Iyer's home. She continues, nights were an ideal time to be with Bhagavan, though the ladies were not allowed this privilege. In the sweet and silent hours of the early night, permeated by the powerful presence of Bhagavan, those around him never knew the passage of time. That was when Bhagavan regaled devotees with the most interesting stories and soul-stirring incidents, immersing them all in waves of bliss. And what bliss it was to be alive then. To be in the presence was heaven indeed. These few devotees had Bhagavan exclusively to themselves, for even the attendants who had been present the whole day, on seeing those close devotees, would quietly depart, leaving them to be alone with Bhagavan. There were some interesting rules on who could and could not be present in the hall at different times of the day. If you had a job working in the ashram, for example, in the cowshed, the garden, or the kitchen, Chinnaswami, the ashram manager, would not allow you to sit in the hall during working hours. You were expected to be doing your appointed tasks at those hours. Workers were only allowed to sit with Bhagavan in the evenings. The devotees who lived locally, such as the independent sadhus who had made their home in Palakottu, could come and go when they liked. Women who generally lived in the town were expected to go home in a group in the early evening, since it was considered dangerous for them to be wandering around at night by themselves. Kanakammal continues. Narayana Iyer and Venkataratnam used to narrate to me whatever transpired in the hall during the nights and on days when I was unable to attend. When I recall those blessed and most happy days, time stands still and my heart brims with joy and peace, and I become one with it. I have shown this photo before, but I'm putting it up again because it's the only photo I could find that has Venkataratnam in it. He is the man standing next to Chadwick with the white cloth draped over his shoulder. He was one of Bhagavan's attendants during the final years of Bhagavan's life. Kanakammal continues with her account. Subsequently, I was posted to Polo, but he did not move his residence from Tiruvannamalai. Instead, he cycled to the station, left his cycle there, took the train to Polo, and again cycled to his office from there. His return in the evenings was by the same route, but like an arrow, he would speed his way directly to the ashram in order to be with Bhagavan. He was like a calf rushing to its mother. By then, it would usually be 9 p.m. Polo is 33 kilometers north of Tiruvannamalai. One evening, as Iyer came from the station, Bhagavan inquired whether he had eaten his dinner. Not yet, Bhagavan, was his reply. Bhagavan, compassion incarnate, was filled with concern and said, "It is already so late. Poor Lalita will be waiting for you. Just think how late it will be for her to go to bed after serving you dinner, eating herself, and then completing the domestic chores. From now on, go home first, have your dinner, and then come to the ashram." And Kanakammal finishes this particular story by writing, "Thus ordered by Bhagavan and also moved by his compassion, I reached his house and exclaimed to his wife, 'How fortunate you are to be so graciously remembered by Bhagavan, despite remaining within the house. From now on, I will have my dinner straight away when I come home from the station.'" The photo is of Narayana Iyer and Lalita in the Ramana garden. Kanakammal's narrative now moves forward to the final days of Bhagavan's life. She wrote, "As Bhagavan's Mahanirvana approached, Narayana Iyer never moved away from the vicinity of Bhagavan. He was therefore a witness to all that went on in those final few precious days." This is Bhagavan sitting in the new hall in early 1950 with a cloth covering his heavily bandaged arm. And this story is what happened after Bhagavan passed away. Kanakammal continues. "At that point, Bhagavan's water pot, kamandalu, and walking stick were in his room as he could not use them anymore. I sensed that several people had secret designs on them, wanting to take them away and preserve them as private sacred relics. After the Mahasamadhi of Bhagavan, various rituals were performed, and the holy body was taken in procession in a small vehicle around the mother's shrine." This is Bhagavan's body being taken in procession on the evening he passed away. The story continues. Iyer took this opportune moment to intervene. He picked up the walking stick and kamandalu and slowly walked ahead of the procession up to the Samadhi chamber where Bhagavan's body would be enshrined. A small hand-spun cloth bag encasing Bhagavan's earthly frame was filled with vibhuti and camphor according to scriptural procedure, and it was then reverentially lowered into the Samadhi chamber. I himself descended into the chamber and placed Bhagavan's walking stick and kamandalu on either side of the body. The Samadhi pit was then slowly filled in. Anyone who had nurtured hopes of acquiring Bhagavan's meager possessions as relics was disappointed. And here is another photo of Bhagavan taken shortly before his body was interred. After that major excursion into Kanakammal's recollection of Narayana Iyer and his family, I'm going to return for the brief remainder of today's talk to the material that Narayana Iyer himself wrote. This is the next section of his own account. Once I asked Bhagavan, Bhagavan, you left your home in Bajarai, where your relatives have been treating you with love and kindness, spending money upon your education. You misappropriated their money for your train fare to Tiruvannamalai. You sneaked to the railway station so as not to be noticed by anyone. You posed as a pilgrim who had lost his kit. Then you saw Tirukoilur, the holy hill, and burst into a wave of sobbing. Was all this straightforward and proper? This is an old photo taken in the corner of the temple where Bhagavan first saw Arunachala on his way to Tiruvannamalai in 1896. Coincidentally, this was also the same place where the great Tamil saint Jnana Sambandha first set eyes on Arunachala. According to one version of the saint's life, Arunachala Swara himself appeared before him there and guided him personally to Tiruvannamalai. This is an old photo. This specific viewing spot is apparently no longer available since there has been a major renovation of the temple. This is Bhagavan's response to Narayana Iyer's rather outspoken question. Sri Bhagavan was silent for a while and then replied, "This can be explained. It is said in the Quran, even falsehood is akin to truth when it is unblemished good and harms none." This shows the freedom I enjoyed with Bhagavan. Bhagavan was not often asked about the ethics of stealing money from his family to get the funds needed for his trip to Tiruvannamalai. This was one of the rare occasions when he was asked about it and gave an answer. The photo shows Narayana Iyer standing on the hill behind Bhagavan. He is the one in the white shirt. Chinnaswamy, wearing glasses, is standing next to him. Narayana Iyer continues, I once told Bhagavan, I have been here for many years. People meditate and get into samadhi. I close my eyes for a minute and the mind travels around the world 10 times and so many long forgotten things come up. Hearing this, Bhagavan said, why do you concern yourself about others? They may meditate or sleep and snore. Look to yourself. Whenever the mind goes astray, bring it back to the quest. There is a verse in the Bhagavad Gita which says, to whatever side the restless, unsteady mind wanders away, one should check it and bring it back controlled to the self. The photo here shows Bhagavan and Narayana Iyer on a walk in Palakottu. The man at the rear is Guy Haig, an American engineer who lived in Palakottu in the late 1930s. Narayana Iyer pressed him on this issue. I was not satisfied, so Sri Bhagavan continued. The child who was woken up and given its milk after it had gone to sleep says to its mother the next morning, Mother, you never gave me milk last night. Even so, you had your fill. Narayana Iyer can be seen standing behind Bhagavan with folded arms. T.K. Sundaresha Iyer, who was mentioned in the story about Bhagavan dictating a letter to Ganapati Muni, is standing on the left. Narayana Iyer continues by writing, his analogy and assurance was convincing and consoling. I cannot even imagine what I would have been but for my contact with Sri Bhagavan. Countless have been the incidents which gripped my heart in bonds of ecstatic love to him. The contact and impact that I have had with Bhagavan have been such as to make me feel that knowingly or unknowingly, I must have done something in the course of my lives to deserve this unique blessing. Narayana Iyer never quite rid himself of the idea that he was an unworthy recipient of Bhagavan's grace. I think nowadays we would say that he suffered from what we call imposter syndrome, an unshakable feeling that he wasn't worthy or spiritually good enough to be receiving the love that Bhagavan publicly and generously bestowed on him. I'm going to return to this theme and this conviction when I complete my series of talks on Narayana Iyer next month. Narayana Iyer concludes this section with the following comment. The lamp has been lit, and not all the darkness of the world can extinguish the light of the burning candle. The contact and impact will and must lead me to the right goal, the be-all and end of human birth. And with that comment by Narayana Iyer, I'm going to conclude this month's presentation. Next month, I'm going to complete the Narayana Iyer chapter. It will be a much shorter talk of about 25 to 30 minutes. The final length will depend on how many digressions and side stories I allow myself to indulge in. Since I normally speak for about 75 to 80 minutes at these meetings, I'm going to use the balance of my time next month to talk about a completely new topic. Last month, I gave, as an aside, a comment by Papaji to the effect that the householder devotees he had met on his travels in India were generally in a far better and more advanced state than any of the sadhus he had met in the Himalayas, who had renounced their family life to seek God or realization in caves or ashrams. As I was telling the story, one woman immediately sprung to mind. I'm going to be telling her story in some detail next month. Meanwhile, thank you for attending and for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. There are a couple of questions in the chat box.
I just need to press a few buttons. Can it be said that the power to create the appearance of worlds and the purpose of those creations necessitates surrender? I'm not quite sure I understand this. Is the person who asked the question there, or did it come in?
The person would need to be here. It hasn't come in from.
It hasn't come in. I'm not joining the dots on this question. I mean, I'll make a few comments on it, but I'm not quite sure what's being asked. The power to create the appearance of the world, Bhagavan always said that was the Shakti of the self, in interacting with vasanas to project an internal seer and an external landscape that the internal seer saw and interacted with. He never really went into the question of what was the purpose of creation, except occasionally to say to make you question the source and origin of it. Why is this thing appearing in front of me? What's the origin of it? How can I find out how it arose, where it came from, and how can I make it disappear? So I don't think he saw any purpose in creation, and I'm not quite sure about this final two words, necessitate surrender. Is the question asking that to believe this necessitates surrender? I don't think so. All you have to do is believe that what Bhagavan was saying was true and act on it. I don't think you necessarily need to surrender anything to have that view. It's just a working hypothesis that gives you a good idea of a working model of how Bhagavan said the world came into existence. And within that working model is the possibility of causing the appearance of manifestation as a thing which is seen by a seen to disappear. So sorry if I didn't get the point of the question. I found it a bit elliptical. Next one, Namaskar David. Could you please share if Bhagavan said something about being liberated after death? Knowing that Bhagavan said that the inquiry, who am I, is the fastest way to be liberated while being alive only, I think. But what about at the end of life in this body? It will help if one thinks on him, Arunachala, when death finally comes to us. There is a story. I think Chadwick quizzed him on this. I think maybe, is Diego here? No. I think Chadwick had heard Bhagavan possibly comment favorably on the idea that whatever thought you had at the moment of your death would bring about your rebirth, or in certain circumstances, your liberation. So he suggested, I think tongue-in-cheek, that he walk out onto the Pradakshina road chanting Arunachala, Arunachala, and throw himself in front of the first truck that came his way. And he said, will I get enlightened if I do that? And Bhagavan said, no, because as you're hurling yourself under the truck, fear of death will come up and you'll have 50 other thoughts before the truck hits you. So that doesn't resolve the question one way or the other. I don't think that Bhagavan said that you could get liberation in a post-death state. I think he did accept that liberation was possible at the moment of death. That's a quite pronounced orthodox Hindu view. But if you haven't made it during your life or at the moment of death, you have to come back. There is the interesting case of Palaniswami, whom Bhagavan, shall we say, almost liberated in 1915 at Virupaksha cave. He said at the last moment his jiva, his eye thought, disappeared out through the eyes, and Bhagavan said it went off to have its final birth in a Deva realm, and it was going to get liberated there. I think that's quite a rare event. I think Bhagavan subscribed to the general view that you had to be in a human body on planet Earth to get enlightened, and that liberation wasn't something that you did in the Deva realms. It was something you came back to do. You had to finish your business here. The morning before I left, Dr. Syed, Professor of Philosophy, Allahabad University, asked Bhagavan, what is the purpose of creation? Usually Bhagavan gave replies in Tamil, Telugu, or Malayalam. This time he spoke directly in English and asked, can the eye see itself? Dr. Syed replied, of course not. It can see everything else, but not itself. To Bhagavan's question that, if it wants to see itself, he said, it can see itself only in a mirror. Bhagavan then commented, that is it. Creation is the mirror for the eye to see itself. That's face to face with Bhagavan. I think this is something he said, that if you see manifestation, then that's an opportunity to question the origin of the one who sees. He said, have the working hypothesis that what you see is an expansion of the eye who sees it, and then question the one who sees the world as an image in a mirror of the self, a reflection of your own mind. He said that's one way of locating the eye, finding its nature, and discovering that everything you see separate and apart from you is a projection of the seeing eye. And he said if you can do that, then the perception of the world as something different from you disappears. Eye goes back to its source. And there we get back to this interesting phrase which Bhagavan said in English, can the eye see itself? So this is reminiscent of what Bhagavan wrote in verse 4 of Oladu Napadu. But basically he's saying there, he has this phrase called the infinite I, that's EYE, not the pronoun. He said the infinite I is the state of jnana, and in that state there is seeing without a seer, knowing without a knower. It's just a state of being in which seeing, knowing, and being are cognate and indistinguishable from each other. So this is a state in which there is no localized seer. There's nothing apart from it which is seen. It's simply the state of jnana, which seems to be defined in that verse, at least by the infinite I, as a state of seeing, being, and knowing.
Available now? Is this in a book form?
No, it's part. The old Power of the Presence exists, but this is a new chapter which I'm going to include next time I reprint. All of those photos which I included today, many of them came from Narayana Iyer's descendants. I got in touch with them and got some very nice pictures, plus the ashram ones. They will all be going in the book along with all the extra stories I included. I'm going to wait until the current edition sells out, and then when it goes to the press again, there will be a new edition with a new chapter, and this will be the new chapter.
It'll be the Power of Presence.
Power of the Presence. There is most of the story appears, I think, on my site. If you look up Narayana Iyer on my site, most of what I've talked about over the last 3 months has been there. I've expanded a lot with comments during these talks, but the basic stuff that he wrote is all there. And that would be the spine of the book, if you like.
Thank you. Brilliant.
David, would you say that the play of grace, Arul Poratam, is really, the most experienced when we are experiencing a lot of life's challenges? I mean,
I would say it's there all the time.
Yes.
If you're having some problem, your attention might go towards it with a please Bhagavan, please whoever your divinity is, please help, and you might find yourself being aware of it simply because you need to kind of put your bucket in the well, if you like, and help yourself to some of it. But I think it's accessible to anyone, anywhere. If you just happen to be going for a walk and feeling quiet, there it is. It's there all the time. It's obviously there if you're having a bad day, and you can turn towards some manifestation of the divine and say help and start to feel it. But I don't think necessarily you get it more on those occasions. I think it's there all the time. All you have to do is cultivate the attitude that it is there all the time, and whenever you recollect that your mind has gone off in a froth somewhere else, recollect that there's a substratum, an underlay, which is grace itself, and all you have to do is turn down the volume in your mind, and it's there all the time.
Yes, very much so. Thank you, David.
I was always wondering about being Satchitananda and being Ajatavada. So from where the Shakti jumps out in Advaita, if it's pure Sat, pure Chit, and pure Ananda, and it's Purnam, it's all and totalness of being. And somehow, on the next level, we are talking about Shakti, which is the power of Satchitananda. So why don't put, like in Kashmiri Shaivism, Satchitananda Shakti, and insist that it is only Satchitananda, but then talk about Shakti. I just put a quote, another quote from Bhagavan in Face to Face, where Bhagavan says, Shakespeare, the self, enjoyed writing this so that born again as we, he might enjoy reading it. This is when somebody read to Bhagavan from Shakespeare and said, and Bhagavan said, oh, what a wonder, Bhagavan as Shakespeare write this in order now to read this and have fun. So where is Bhagavan now? But in this moment in our presence together, we are creating it now. But from where jumps this Shakti if it's pure Satchitananda?
It's inherent in the nature of the self. This is what Bhagavan would say, that it can be motionless, actually, it can be still, it can be silent, it can be the mauna, but it also contains within itself the potential to activate an appearance of manifestation. There's no answer to the question how or why. It's simply part of the inherent nature of the self that it contains within it the potential of an active phase in which manifestation appears, but its fundamental nature is never going to be anything other than Satchitananda. As Bhagavan said, I think at the end of verse 6 of the Ashtakam, whether the pictures appear or not, it's all you. The only thing that ever exists is the shining of the self, the radiance of the self. Pictures, manifestation may appear within it. They're created by or sustained by the Shakti. And if the Shakti resolves itself back into the self, the pictures disappear. But the self is not added to or subtracted from by the appearance or disappearances of the imagery. It's just part of the inherent nature of the self, that occasionally it's in a manifest mode and occasionally it's not. But because the manifest mode is not permanent, Bhagavan would always say you can't ultimately say that the appearance is real, because nothing that comes and goes is real. The only truth, the only reality is that which never comes and goes, and that is the unmanifest self without the Shakti. Thank you everyone for listening, putting up with my overlong talks.
Thank you.